AI can be helpful is around healthcare. Absolutely key as we live these longer lives is to be healthy.
Hi, I'm Sanjupta. Welcome to Slow Fix Conversations. I'm talking today to Dr. Andrew Scott. He's an economics professor at the London Business School, but he's known more for his work on longevity. In fact, his latest book, The Longevity Imperative, Building a Better Society for Healthier, Longer Lives, is just out in India. I reached out to Dr. Scott to talk about what he calls the second revolution of longevity. In his first book, The 100-Year Life, he talked about a longevity revolution, which primarily meant people are living longer now. So what is the second revolution? Is it living better? Is it thriving as, 60-year-olds, 70-year-olds, 80-year-olds, 90-year-olds? Is it about blue zones, as we have seen in a recent Netflix series? So he tells us about all the research that's going on around longevity and what his findings are, and what really brought about this book. So let's get into the conversation. We'll find out more. All right. So good evening to you from warm and muggy Mumbai. I guess you're joining me from...
Would you believe it's not very warm and slightly overcast here in London? Would you believe that?
Yes. Okay, yeah. So I just finished reading this wonderful book this morning.
Fantastic, thank you.
Yeah, and in my introduction to you and the book, I was saying, in this debate of longevity, which is sort of engaging so many wellness experts and thinkers in the world, there's so much wisdom and rigor in this book. I loved it. So let's start by you explaining to us a difference that you mention in the book, the difference between life expectancy and healthy life expectancy.
Yeah.
What's the difference?
So life expectancy, of course, is how long on average, and that's an important thing, a newborn child can expect to live. And there's different measures of that, but that's about the quantity of life. And then there's healthy life expectancy, which is a measure of how many of those years are in good health. And of course, as we get older, our health starts to slip. But as we live longer and longer, we're spending more and more time in years of poorer health. So the gap between life expectancy and healthy life expectancy is widening.
Right.
The good news is we're getting more years of healthy life. The bad news is we're getting more years of unhealthy life. And that's a problem, because when previously we had life expectancy gains, going from 30 to 50, that was a longer life and they were in good health. But now we're seeing more and more people living to longer, we're seeing this problem.
Right. And you mentioned the second longevity revolution, right? And I think it ties into this difference in a sense. Can you tell us how we got here, how we got to the second revolution right now?
Yeah, so sorry, just bear with me. I just want to try and it's been a busy day, and I just want to try and check something on India, actually. Yeah, so life expectancy has been increasing substantially over the last 100-odd years. And of course, in India, which I'm literally just looking up now, 1960 life expectancy was 45, and before COVID, it was 71.
Yeah.
So in a way, that's what I call the first longevity revolution. We've gone from a world where the average child couldn't expect to become old to one where they now can. When life expectancy in India is at 70, that's a remarkable achievement. The majority of newborns can now expect to become old. But of course, that then links into your first question. But more and more of these years are now in poor health. So that's what I call the second longevity revolution, having got to a point now through tremendous innovations in health treatment, public health, rising economic prosperity that helps us to have better nutrition. We've now got to focus not upon making the young become old, but how do we change how we age? How do we age in a better way? Because we just haven't set up institutions to support such a long life. And when life expectancy was 45 in India, you wouldn't say, well, it's a really important problem to try and make sure we've got institutions that work for old people.
Yeah.
Now the majority can expect to become old. You've really got to. So first longevity revolution, getting the young to expect to become old. The second longevity revolution, how do we change how we age?
So, of course, your book has a lot of studies, a lot of insight into how that's possible. So briefly, can you tell us, how do we age differently and thrive in say, multiple stages of life, especially say in a country like India. Our attitude to the old is, you retire from your work and then you sort of live, rest, and you just live. You are like a repository of wisdom. You're a wise old man or woman, and you sort of live like waiting for death, right? That's the culture, kind of. That is also the cultural sort of way. How can people thrive in multiple stages?
No, of course, it's an enormous change, isn't it? And given how rapid India's growth has been, it's just another dramatic change that India has to go through. And you just picked up, I think there's two advantages India's got, in the sense that one, you just said, there's a connection between being old and being wise, and knowledge, which actually is a good thing, because in my own country, we tend to medicalize old age and see old people just in terms of decline. Another advantage I think India's got, I think, is much better at doing things intergenerationally. What tends to happen as countries get richer, you have more old people. And what's interesting is some evidence that suggests that the richer you get and the more old people you have, the less you value older people. When they're rare, you sort of say, oh, wow, I don't know many people who kind of can think that back and had that much experience. But as you have more and more older people, you tend to get a more negative opinion. So, what do we have to think about? It is, I say, quite remarkable. If we think about our life, it's gone up by 50 over 100 years. So that's sort of every generation outliving its parents by 10 to 15 years, which is remarkable.
Yeah.
And so if you know what your parents, your grandparents did, you're going to be pretty poorly prepared, because not many of your grandparents had that chance of reaching to that age. So how do we do it? Well, in my book, The 100-Year Life, I talked about how do you make this a good life? And one thing people always go to is work and finances. How do I finance it? And of course, you're going to have to be working for longer.
Yeah.
But then there's also your productive assets. So how do you remain skillful and relevant? And if you've been working for 20 or 30 years and you still want to do something, how do you get the skills? How do you get the aptitude to do it? Then there's your health. And of course, that's going to be utterly key, your mental and physical health. How do you keep investing in it? There's your relationships and your friendships, both personal and professional. And then there's your ability to think about change and to adapt and not to get set in your way. So these are all radically different ways of structuring a career. I mean, I think the key thing here is, of course, there's lots of diversity in this. I think about India, the average life expectancy is around 70. There's going to vary enormously depending upon where you are on the income spectrum.
Yes.
And of course, everyone always thinks India has a very young population, which in some sense it does. As the birth rate falls and people live for longer, you see an increase in the average age of the population. But India's at a very early stage of that process.
Yeah.
But there's so many people in India that India has lots of people who are aged over 65. So already I think there are policies that are needed about how do we support these people? How do we find them financial security? How do we make sure they're included and not socially excluded? But going back to your question about careers, if you're in a sort of professional career or a management career, you will want to be engaged for as long as possible. I think that's the key thing about a longer life. I talk about a three-dimensional longevity dividend. We've got these longer lives. How to make them healthier for longer, but how do you make them engaged and productive for longer? And that's not just about working. That's about having a motivation and a reason to get out of bed. And I think that's the key thing. However old you are, you've got more time ahead of you than your past generations. So you need to behave differently. And that's about investing in your future. Now, as I say, I don't think there's any one answer for anyone, but what you know is that what your future self needs is options. If you give your future self those options, and what are they? They're obviously money, health, skills, and relationships. Then you're going to be okay. But you've got to spend more time investing in them because you've got more of a future. Me at 58 has to invest in my future much more than my father did at 58 and my grandfather at 58.
Right. And the role of technology, I mean, India is pretty bullish about AI and like the whole world. And do you think technology and AI have any sort of solid answers to, or at least suggestions to sort of do this, your evergreen agenda,
Yeah, no, so I mean, I think the trouble with AI is we don't know how it's going to end up. But I think there's certainly some exciting things. So here's a bunch of thoughts. So the first is, if we're living for longer, if we're not to see a fall in our standard of living, we've got to produce more over our lifetime. And one way to do that is to work for longer. But if AI suddenly makes us much more productive, then that's great. I don't need to work for longer. Although what I think is interesting in that situation is that I don't necessarily think you want to stop work at 60 and then carry on retirement. You might want to take some time earlier. So I think this is some of the interesting issues we've got. But AI, if it makes us more productive, may actually mean that we get more leisure and we can take some of that now and some of it later in life. The other ways I think AI can be helpful is around healthcare. And absolutely key as we live these longer lives is to be healthy. And I'm sure you'll pick this up on the book. Right now, we have the reason we achieved the first longevity revolution was through a range of health interventions tackling disease. So we've eradicated smallpox, amazing. Cholera is now much less like it used to be. And these are the phenomenal achievements that have helped the young now expect to become old. That disease model doesn't work when we get older, because as we get older, we now have these aging-related diseases. What do we mean by aging-related diseases? Diseases where you're likely to get them increases with age. And in India today, given life expectancy, the biggest lifetime health burden of a child born today in India will be these aging-related diseases. And what's key about those diseases is that if you wait until they manifest themselves and show up as a problem and restricting you, and then you go to a doctor, it's too late. You've got to try and keep healthy. So you've got to focus upon maintaining your health rather than treating a disease when it's sufficiently far advanced. And that's a huge shift. So we need a lot of innovation. Just as we saw amazing innovation in the first longevity revolution, we need a lot in the second. I think AI have a huge role to play in that. I think AI will have a role to play in the following way. First of all, our bodies are very complicated, and AI will work on genetics to come up with better and quicker drug development. I think we'll also be able to work out, although our bodies, of course, are similar, we're all humans, there's a lot of variations across us. So help us do more personalized medicine. And then, of course, it's going to be able to be screening. And I think the really big challenge for a health system is how does it get the data on a frequent basis for people so it can intervene early to keep people healthy. And then the final thing I'll say about AI, there's a lot of concern about AI in jobs, which I think is valid. But I actually suspect AI might work quite well for older workers. If you look at sort of manufacturing or very physical work, we'll see a lot more robots being used, which I think will help older. In a way, as machines get better at being machines, we as humans are going to focus on more humans. And there's some evidence that says that as we get older, we're better at dealing with people. We're less egotistical. We're better at making teams work. So I think some of the skills that AI will increase the value of, because it's perhaps not so good at them, will be found in older work.
Yeah. What is your perspective on the blue zones? The world over, we have a Netflix series now, and geography, culture, we are talking about the Japanese concept of ikigai, sense of purpose in life. How much does geography contribute? But because if you see data, it doesn't really sort of tally with that as much, because mortality, longevity rates are going up everywhere in the world, right? So what is your view on the blue zones? I think
it's a great question. So one of the things I'm trying to do is to get people aware that they have to live their lives differently from their parents and grandparents because of this increase in life expectancy. And we always sort of go straight to being old, but the real is the young can now expect to become old. And that means we've got to do things differently. But of course, throughout human history, the first epic novel, Gilgamesh, is about the search for immortality. We've always been sort of, oh, wow, that's interesting. And so we like the idea that there are these Shangri-Las of longevity. And I think to the extent that the blue zones raise awareness of, oh, I want to live a long life, I want it to be healthy and engaged, I think they're great. You're probably aware there's some statistical concerns have been raised about whether there really is exceptional longevity in these areas, or whether it's just bad record keeping, who knows. But I think what's interesting about the blue zones is that they capture people's attention. And one of the problems with longevity is scientific proof that any of this stuff works. We can't do an experiment, take 2 children at birth, and then control their life for the rest of their life and say that's what makes a difference. But there's some very interesting science coming along. But right now, we kind of do know what makes for a good, healthy life, and it's the sort of stuff the blue zones emphasizes: don't eat too much, don't drink too much, don't smoke. have a purpose, keep physically active, be part of a community, and all those things I think the Blue Zones emphasize. And that sounds like a good life to me.
Yeah.
And of course, I think what's interesting about this is that we've always known these things are important. It's just the incentive to do them now is so high because when life expectancy in 1920 in India is 20, you're not going to think about, oh, I really must make sure I'm healthy if I reach 80 or 90.
Yeah.
But when life expectancy is now 70 and you can now have a plausible chance of getting to that age, wow, you've got to start to do it. So I think what's interesting about Blue Zones and the extent to which it motivates people to think longer term and go, wow, in my book, I sort of talk about longevity imperative. You are now likely to become old. You worry about getting old. What can you do now to make sure you age well? And I think that's the great thing about the Blue Zones. All this stuff, for me, anything that you follow to extremes is probably not very healthy. And so good advice and sensible stuff is the best we've got for now.
What is the role of, say, a native indigenous wisdom in this? Because as you see, the wellness industry is exploding right now, and a lot of big industries are even tapping into these age-old systems, Chinese medicine, Ayurveda, yoga, this, that. Does the pandemic have something to do with this burst of interest in indigenous systems and also the longevity discussion? And how do indigenous cultures sort of come into this?
Yeah, no, I think it's a really good question. If we go back to sort of having medicalized old age, we do always think about it as decline, and we think about treating that decline pharmaceutically. But if you're thinking about preventative health and maintaining a good life, it's not obvious that modern medicine's got much to tell us. There's a quote in the book I use from the British poet W.H. Health is a subject of which medicine knows nothing about. Modern pharmaceutical system is set up to treat disease. And as you say, there's a much longer ancient wisdom that says these are good things to do. They keep you mentally well and they keep you physically well. I think what's interesting about those is they are themselves very long-lived. So there must be some reason why they've been around for hundreds, if not thousands of years. So I agree. And so then the question is why they're becoming common now. It's interesting how people are waking up to their living longer lives. I think also what you're seeing is certainly at the top end, very wealthy individuals. They're saying, well, I've got my money. How do I don't want more money. What's most valuable to me? Oh, it's health. And so they're getting very interested in saying, well, I may have been very busy in the past. I may have been very stressed out. How do I rebalance myself? So I think you're seeing that a little bit at the top end. But of course, I think what's great about some of this ancient stuff that you mentioned is that it doesn't take a lot of money. And I think that's the key thing. What we've got to do is find ways in which everyone can find a way to do something. So it's interesting. I mean, it's not that science hasn't got a role to play. It's got a huge role to play because a lot of how we age, so this side of 80, about 80% of how we age is down to our behavior and our environment. And 20% is genetic. If we're going to live to 120, it's going to need science. Not me doing like that.
True.
But if 80% is due to your behavior and environment, if you've got the resources to influence that behavior and environment, that's really powerful news because you can change how you age. I say that we've got to change how we age, and of course that would be a pipe dream that there's nothing we can do, but we know we can. So in my study, we've got chronological age, which is how many birthdays we've had. But there's lots of other measures of age. There's your biological age. There's your functioning age. And I think things like yoga and Pilates, etc., they're phenomenal for helping you function better for longer. And I think that's absolutely key.
So finally, I want to ask you a little bit about the writing of the book. You have some personal elements in the book. You say that you're a link between your parents and your child. So can you talk a little bit about how the personal elements in your life have sort of impacted your thinking? And also there's some amazing literary references. There's Swift, there's Oscar Wilde. It reminded me of like our epics here, where there are mentions of these magical herbs, the immortality pill, those things exist. So talk a little bit about your influences, about, how sort of you got into the subject and how it's impacted you.
So that's a great question. So let me sort of say, So thank you, big up on that. And I think there's three reasons why I did all of that. The first was, demography can be a bit dry when you start talking about statistics about life expectancy.
Yeah.
What drives me mad about this topic is it's incredibly interesting and very personal. It's about each and every one of us. As a macroeconomist, I talk about big major trends like globalization, AI, but this is really personal. This is about life and death and birth and families. So I thought I would illustrate some of the issues just by reference to myself. And it turned out my family was very average. So it was perfect to sort of explain these demographic trends. And you start seeing yourself at some point, Peter.
Right.
The second thing is, and I'll come back to sort of how I got into this, but I love longevity because it's a topic that covers all sorts of different disciplines. And there's books about health, there's books about finances, there's books about careers, but I wanted to weave it all together, have something broad. And for me, that's key. And it's interesting, in the book, I quote Plato, the Greek poet, which says, the point of life is to become who you are, having discovered what that is.
Right. Yeah.
And for me, one of the nice things about this book was, I'm really interested with stuff. I want to bring it together. This is me. And so that was good. And then the third thing is, as you start to think about longer life and what is the point of a longer life, and you can deal with the technical issues about the health system and finance system and the economy, all of which is in the book. But it comes down to, why do we want a long life? And it's about us as people. It's a very personal topic. And the more I worked on the technical side of it, the more I understood the personal side of it. And in terms of my motivation for getting into this topic, I'm a macroeconomist who most of my career has been spent on interest rates, exchange rates, GDP, all the things you expect in the economy.
Yeah, I Googled that. I found that. Yeah.
But of course, as a business school, what I'm interested in is those big trends that change the world around us. So I got involved in aging, and then I thought we had the story wrong. I thought it's a remarkably negative story, the aging society. No one ever gets excited about an aging society. No one says, yeah, great, but we should do, because it's fewer children snatched away in early years. And I start the book about my twin brother. It's fewer parents being lost in midlife and more grandparents meeting their grandchildren. It's the most wonderful thing. But economists turn around and say, oh my goodness, we've got an aging society. So I thought we'd missed it. And so I missed the point. So that's how intellectually I got into it. And there was a slide in a lecture I gave which said, on average, we're living longer and we're healthier for longer. I thought that sounds quite good to me. And that got me thinking about why we paint it only as a bad story. And then I had just lost my parents, and I was watching my children emerge into adulthood and doing things differently. I was at my own sort of midlife change. I was a little bit bored of what I was doing before and looking for something new. And all those things kind of came together. And I thought, oh, this is what's happening. We're changing how we're aging. And of course, once as an academic, you see an idea like that, everything fits into it. So anyway, is that sort of a good answer for you? Or I mean, I really wanted to ask that question.
Yeah. And talk about the literary inspiration. Talk about what is your favorite sort of literary example about living well and living long?
Yeah, it's interesting. So of course, in the the Epic of Gilgamesh is a point where he doesn't want immortality, he just realizes it's a foolish thing to do. And I do think there's something about that, about immortality. And I mentioned the Borges book where, again, the same story emerges. Living forever will be very, very boring. But it's not something I worry about because I'm not going to live forever. But, Bob Hope once said, when asked, who wants to live to 100, he just said, well, ask any 99-year-old. And I think that's key. So what are the favorite examples in the book on literature? There's lots of negatives. I like the Samuel Beckett quote at the beginning, where I say, we give birth astride a grave, the light flickers an instant and then it disappears. And that's no longer the case. And I think that's a beautiful way of sort of understanding the change. And then, I use those literary references to say, how do we want to age? And the Dorian Gray one, I think, is the interesting one there, because we all want to live longer. None of us want to get old. And I think that's the Dorian Gray.
None of us want to get old.
But which one did you like best? Which literary reference did you like best?
Oscar Wilde. I mean, Yeah, I mean, I know, Oscar Wilde is a favorite, so I picked
Yeah,
on to that, even
yeah.
Jonathan Swift, and it made me think about many Indian examples as well. So, yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Scott. Best of luck for your work, and I hope
Thank you
we
very
sort
much.
of get this conversation going, and I hope the evergreen agenda is a reality soon, right? Thank you.
Fantastic. Fingers crossed.
Thank you
It's
so
making
much.
progress. Thank you then.